The sudden chill of the water made her flinch, and a soft gasp escaped her lips. Her gray curls soaked instantly, rivulets of icy water traced down her face, soaking the front of her uniform and pooling around her sneakers. The sterile white glow of the overhead lights flickered slightly as silence enveloped the late-night corridors of Vanguard Systems headquarters in downtown Chicago. It was just past 11 p.m., and the hum of computers and the occasional creak of air vents were the only sounds echoing through the 39th floor. In the middle of that silence, a sudden voice cut like a blade. "Do you still not understand your place, Denise?" barked the voice of Nathan Crowley, operations director of the company. His tone was soaked in contempt, each word sharpened by a practiced sense of superiority. Standing at the end of the polished hallway was Denise Carter, an older woman clad in a gray janitorial uniform. She held a mop in one hand and a bucket of fresh water beside her. The name tag pinned to her chest simply read D. Carter. Her hands, though wrinkled, were steady. Her back, though bowed slightly from years of labor, remained straight. Nathan took 2 steps forward, his shiny brown Oxfords tapping against the floor that Denise had just spent over an hour scrubbing. Without breaking stride, he marched over the glistening surface with deliberate disregard, leaving behind a trail of dusty prints. "You're nothing but a janitor." "Nothing," he sneered. "Clean this hallway again. I want to see my reflection in it, clearly. If not, don't bother showing up tomorrow." Denise looked up at him, eyes calm, voice controlled. "Sir, I've already cleaned this floor 3 times. It's as clean as it can be." That reply seemed to set something off in Nathan. He turned slowly to the break room table nearby, grabbed a disposable cup filled with cold water, and without hesitation, poured it directly over Denise's head. The sudden chill of the water made her flinch, and a soft gasp escaped her lips. Her gray curls soaked instantly, rivulets of icy water traced down her face, soaking the front of her uniform and pooling around her sneakers. It wasn't just the temperature that sent a shiver through her, it was the calculated cruelty. The act wasn't an accident. It wasn't even a mistake. It was a statement. A punishment. "Now," Nathan said with a smirk, tossing the empty cup onto the ground like trash, "you've got something real to clean." With that, he turned and walked away, satisfaction stretched across his face like a banner. Behind him, a few junior employees who had witnessed the scene stood frozen in place, eyes down, unsure whether to speak or flee. They said nothing. And soon, they dispersed like ghosts, vanishing down corridors without a word. Denise stood still in the wet silence, the mop slipping slightly from her damp grip. Her breathing slowed, but her heart thundered beneath her chest. She didn't wipe the water from her face right away. Instead, she let it linger because in that moment, something inside her shifted. Nathan Crowley had no idea who he'd just humiliated. To him, she was just another faceless, replaceable custodian. But Denise Carter wasn't what she appeared to be. She was no ordinary janitor. She was the founder of Vanguard Systems. 36 years ago, Denise had started this company out of a 1-bedroom apartment in South Side Chicago with nothing but $3,000, a refurbished Dell laptop, and a dream no one believed in. As a black woman with no Ivy League degree, she had been told again and again she'd never make it. But she didn't just make it, she built a software empire worth over $8 billion. She led the company until last year, when she quietly stepped down to hand over the reins to her son, Miles Carter, a brilliant MIT graduate with a sharp mind and a heart she had personally molded with her values, humility, fairness, and respect. But lately, whispers had reached her ears. Whispers of arrogance in the upper management. Of entry-level staff being mistreated. Of a culture of elitism growing in the very halls she had built to foster collaboration and kindness. Denise had tried to ask questions, but the answers were always polished and hollow. So she did what no one could have predicted: she cut her hair short, colored it gray, and applied for a custodial job under a false name. In just 2 weeks on the night shift, she had already seen more than enough. But tonight, tonight was something else entirely. She picked up the crumpled cup Nathan had tossed. Her hands shook not from the cold, but from something deeper. A rage that had nothing to do with pride or ego. A rage born from betrayal. She had built this company with the vision that absolutely no one would ever be treated as less than. Not the engineers. Not the janitors. Not anyone. And now, the people she trusted had allowed it to become this. Denise dropped the cup into the trash bin and leaned against the mop handle. Her soaked uniform clung to her back, and cold water dripped from her sleeves to the floor. But her expression was no longer stunned or broken. It was calm. Steeled. Unmoving. She was done observing. It was time to act. Nathan Crowley thought he had embarrassed an old cleaning woman. He didn't know that he had just poured ice water onto a storm. A storm that was about to hit back. The night air in Chicago was brisk, whispering through the narrow alley that ran beside Vanguard Systems' towering glass and steel headquarters. Denise Carter, now wearing a plain gray uniform and a faded name tag that read Margaret, stepped through the back service entrance. Her sneakers squeaked softly against the polished tile floor. Everything felt cold and sterile, a far cry from the warmth and vision she had poured into this company decades ago. Inside, the custodial break room smelled of bleach and industrial soap. A middle-aged man named Troy, the janitorial team lead, stood by a dented vending machine and gave her a quick glance. "New hire?" he asked without interest. "Yes, sir," Denise replied, keeping her tone humble. Her voice, once commanding boardrooms, now blended into the background. Troy barely acknowledged her. "You've got floor 12 tonight. Conference rooms, hallways, windows. Stick to schedule. Don't linger." He handed her a mop bucket, a pack of disposable gloves, and a handheld vacuum. Without waiting for her reply, he walked out. Denise stood in silence for a moment, staring at her reflection in the small window on the break room door. The woman looking back at her had aged, yes, but her spirit was intact. "You started this," she whispered to herself. "Now finish it." The 12th floor was where mid-level management operated. It had once been a floor filled with laughter, team collaboration, and Friday afternoon brainstorm sessions. Now it felt like a mausoleum, silent, tight, uncomfortable. Denise moved quickly but quietly. She didn't want to draw attention, not yet. As she polished the glass wall outside the strategy team's conference room, 2 employees in suits walked by, too immersed in conversation to even notice her. One of them dropped a crumpled coffee cup onto the floor, inches from the trash bin. Denise bent down, picked it up, and tossed it without complaint. She reminded herself this was part of the disguise. Part of the mission. Around 10:42 p.m., the elevator dinged and opened. A man in an expensive wool overcoat stepped out, checking his Apple Watch. He looked around the hallway with thinly veiled disdain. "Still here?" he asked as he approached Denise. She turned and nodded. "Yes, sir. Just finishing the floors." The man was Connor West, the new vice president of operations. He was in his late 40s, immaculately dressed, and had the confidence of someone who thought they'd never be challenged. Denise had read about him in internal reports, heard whispers from former colleagues, and tonight she finally saw the arrogance for herself. Connor eyed the floor critically. "It still looks streaky. Do it again. And next time, maybe try not rushing through it like it's your driveway at home." Denise said nothing. She dipped the mop back into the bucket and began again. But Connor wasn't done. As he walked away, he deliberately tipped over a nearby trash can. Crumpled paper, coffee stirrers, and a half-eaten sandwich spilled onto the floor. "Oh," he said with fake surprise. "Seems like a mess over here. Clean it up before anyone sees." Denise clenched the mop handle tightly, then forced her shoulders to relax. "Yes, Mr. West." By midnight, her body was aching, but her spirit was undeterred. She'd witnessed enough tonight to know that the cultural rut she feared was not just rumor. It was real. It was systemic. And it was much worse than she imagined. At 12:35 a.m., while emptying the hallway trash bins, Denise witnessed another moment that shook her. A young custodian named Rosa, barely in her 20s, likely an immigrant from Central America based on her soft-spoken accent, was cornered by a supervisor in a crisp white shirt. Denise recognized him. His name was Tyler Brandt, an ambitious junior director from the marketing team. "Why is the coffee machine still dirty?" Tyler barked. "Do you even clean anything?" Rosa stammered an apology, eyes wide with fear. "I did. I cleaned it after lunch, sir. Maybe someone used it again." Tyler rolled his eyes and raised his voice. "Do you think this is a joke? You think you can slack off and no one notices?" Rosa lowered her head. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll do it again." "You better," he snapped. "And if I see one more mistake, I'll have your badge pulled." Denise felt her fists curl inside her gloves. She wanted to march over and say something, but she held back. Not yet. This wasn't the moment. She waited until Tyler left before quietly approaching Rosa. "You okay?" The girl looked up, startled. Then, seeing Denise's kind eyes, she nodded, though her chin trembled. "I've seen the way they treat you," Denise said gently. "You deserve better. Don't forget that." Rosa offered a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Miss Margaret," Denise replied, squeezing her shoulder lightly. But as she turned and walked away, she made herself a promise. "This ends soon." By 1:30 a.m., Denise was back in the supply closet on the 7th floor, wiping her forehead with a paper towel. She pulled a small black notebook from her coat pocket and began writing notes. Connor West, deliberate humiliation. Trash incident. Targeting older workers. Tyler Brandt, threats against younger staff. Emotional intimidation. General culture, fear, silence, invisibility. She closed the notebook and slipped it back into her coat. Then she reached into a hidden compartment in her cart and checked a small voice recorder she had hidden beneath the mop handle. Still recording. She smiled grimly. This was just night one. But the battle had begun. The dim glow of the exit sign flickered overhead as Denise Carter wheeled her mop cart through the 39th floor of Vanguard Systems. The clock had just struck 11:45 p.m., and the building was all but deserted except for the late-night hum of servers, distant elevator chimes, and the occasional echo of footsteps from those burning the midnight oil. Her back ached slightly as she wiped down the glass walls of the executive lounge, but it wasn't the physical strain that weighed her down tonight. It was what she had seen and heard over the past week. Vanguard Systems, once the crown jewel of integrity and inclusiveness, was now rotten with quiet cruelty and unchecked power. Denise had already endured the arrogance of Calvin Drayton, the VP of Operations, who continued to belittle her with every encounter. But now another figure was stepping into the spotlight, Simone Caldwell, the Director of Strategic Communications. At first glance, Simone was the image of modern corporate leadership: sharp suits, smoother speeches, and an Instagram feed full of empowerment quotes. But behind closed doors, her charm turned to ice. That evening, as Denise was finishing up in the executive pantry, Simone entered with a steaming cup of espresso in hand. "Oh. You're still here," Simone said flatly, barely glancing at Denise. "You know, this place smelled fresher before you started working here. Maybe you're using the wrong cleaning supplies." Denise turned and offered a polite nod, biting back the retort she felt forming in her throat. "I'm following the standard procedure, ma'am. Same disinfectants used by the team before me." Simone clicked her tongue and rolled her eyes. "Well, maybe it's time to update those standards. I want this place to smell like citrus, not a hospital." She placed her cup on the edge of the counter and walked away without another word. Denise sighed, reaching for the microfiber cloth to clean up the ring of espresso Simone had left behind. But this wasn't the worst of it. 2 nights later, a young custodian named Julio, a 22-year-old part-time worker putting himself through college, was quietly mopping the glass corridor between the engineering and analytics wings. Denise noticed him because he always worked quickly, rarely spoke, and never made eye contact with management. That night, she saw him cornered near the vending machine area by Calvin Drayton. "Missed a spot," Calvin barked, pointing to a nearly invisible smudge on the floor. Julio nodded nervously and knelt down. "No, no," Calvin said, shaking his head. "You missed this one too." He dragged the sole of his expensive dress shoe along the clean tile, leaving behind a black mark. Julio's eyes dropped to the floor, his fingers trembling slightly as he reached for the mop. Calvin smirked and added, "Maybe if you spent less time texting and more time cleaning, this place would actually look decent." Denise, watching from a distance, felt something burn in her chest. After Calvin walked off, she approached Julio slowly. "You okay?" she asked gently. He didn't answer at first. Then he just nodded, not looking up. "Yeah. I'm used to it." That answer stayed with her the rest of the night. The culture of silence was deeper than she feared. Vanguard's upper floors were palaces of polished steel and glass, but they were filled with invisible people who were spoken at, not spoken to, who were treated as extensions of their brooms and buckets, not as human beings. And yet, no one spoke up. Not the young engineers. Not the night supervisors. Not even the building security, who saw it all from their cameras and guard posts. That silence was deafening. By the end of the week, Denise decided it was time to test another part of the system: HR. She had avoided it at first. Maybe some naive part of her still hoped that the culture of fear and elitism she saw was limited to a few toxic figures. Maybe the company's formal structures still held some shred of integrity. So the next evening, she filed a formal report using her alias, Dana Hill, and requested a one-on-one meeting with the Director of Human Resources, Kelsey Bradshaw. Kelsey was known for her polished professionalism. Her LinkedIn profile spoke volumes about transformational HR practices and open-door leadership. Her office was modern, sunlit by day, and accented with motivational posters and neatly arranged bonsai trees. Denise walked in, her janitor's badge clipped to her shirt, and stood in front of Kelsey's desk with a calm but steady voice. "I'd like to report ongoing harassment from senior staff," she said. Kelsey looked up from her laptop, blinking slowly behind her gold-rimmed glasses. "You're Dana, right? Janitorial, night shift?" "Yes," Denise replied. "The VP of Operations and the Director of Communications have repeatedly." Kelsey held up her hand. "Slow down. I'll need you to be very specific. And very realistic." Denise explained what she had seen. What she had experienced. She described Julio's humiliation, the repeated messes Calvin and Simone created just to assert power, and the casual cruelty embedded in their language. Kelsey listened without nodding. Then she closed her laptop softly. "Dana," she said carefully, "this is a high-performance environment. Sometimes, people expect a lot. Maybe more than you're used to. That's not abuse, it's pressure. And that's how excellence is born." Denise didn't flinch. "And dumping coffee on a clean floor? Mocking people's age? That's pressure?" Kelsey's lips tightened. "If you're uncomfortable here, maybe this isn't the right fit for you. We don't want anyone to feel out of place. But management styles differ, and frankly there are expectations. Especially for support roles." That was it. Denise walked out of the office with a storm brewing in her heart. Kelsey wasn't just complicit, she was part of the machinery. The same culture Mary Carter had once built to empower the overlooked was now shielding abusers. The quiet rage Denise had carried since her first night was now a roaring engine. She was done gathering anecdotes. Now she would gather evidence. Back in her apartment that night, she pulled open the false bottom of her mop cart. Inside it, a small GoPro camera lay hidden, attached to a stabilizing mount. She had installed it 3 nights ago after Simone had poured lemon soda into a trash bin and told her to stop being so sensitive. She pulled out the tiny SD card, slid it into her old ThinkPad, and began organizing files. There would be no more warnings. The next phase of her mission had begun. It was just after midnight when Denise Carter wheeled her cart into the 43rd floor conference lounge. Her gloves squeaked faintly as she adjusted them, her eyes scanning the space as if looking for more than just crumbs and spills. In truth, she was hunting shadows, the kind of shadows people in power thought they could hide behind. The SD card she'd reviewed the night before was damning. Clear footage of Simone Caldwell smirking while deliberately spilling her drink across the floor. Calvin Drayton dragging his shoe through a freshly cleaned section while mumbling, "Let's see how fast the help jumps." These were no longer isolated incidents. They were a pattern. A deliberate, methodical display of domination. Denise had seen abuse in her younger years, back when she worked her way up as a single mother through the mailroom of a smaller firm in St. Louis. But nothing had ever stung quite like watching her own creation Vanguard Systems turn into a cold empire built on silence and fear. And now, she had to act. But first, she needed help. Earlier that day, she had taken a calculated risk. During her lunch break eaten in the janitorial break room near the loading dock, she sat down beside a quiet young man named Elijah Porter. Elijah, barely 20, worked the loading elevator and stock management. He rarely spoke, always had his earbuds in, and seemed invisible even among the invisible. "Elijah," she said gently, her voice low. He pulled out one earbud, startled. "Yeah? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." Elijah blinked, confused but curious. "Have you ever seen how Calvin treats people when no one's watching?" Elijah's expression darkened, almost imperceptibly. "You mean the floor managers?" "Yeah. He's not nice." "Not nice," Denise echoed, smiling bitterly. "You ever see him mock staff? Spill things on purpose?" Elijah hesitated, then nodded. "Saw him dump an entire bottle of juice on the security guy's desk once. Then yelled at the custodian for not being fast enough to clean it up. Do you remember when? 3 weeks ago. Wednesday. Around 1 a.m. Denise's pulse quickened. "Would you be willing to talk to someone about it?" He looked around the break room cautiously. "Talk to who?" "To help stop this," she said. "To bring them down." Elijah stared at her, studying her for a long, tense second. Then, with a quiet breath, he nodded. "I'll help. But if they find out, I'm done." "They won't. I'll protect you," Denise promised. It was the first time in weeks she had seen hope in someone else's eyes. That evening, as she cleaned the 41st floor cafeteria, she noticed another janitor, Maribel, struggling with a broken mop. Maribel, a Guatemalan immigrant in her late 30s, had always been reserved but kind. Denise had watched her deal with microaggressions from Simone more than once. Now was the time to reach out. She approached gently, handed Maribel her spare mop, and whispered, "You know what they did to you last week? I saw it. I have it on video." Maribel looked up in shock, her eyes wide. "I'm trying to stop them. But I can't do it alone." Maribel didn't say anything, but she squeezed Denise's hand tight. It was enough. The army of the unseen was slowly awakening. One by one, Denise made quiet connections. Warehouse boys, kitchen staff, part-time cleaners. She didn't ask them to speak up yet. She just asked for stories. Names. Times. Incidents. Every one of them came with pain. She catalogued each account carefully on a spreadsheet she stored offline: abuse from Simone during team events, Calvin's vulgar jokes about older staff, Derek the finance director making veiled threats to interns who didn't play along. The iceberg was enormous. And she was just at the tip. Then came the break she had been waiting for. Late on a Thursday night, as she was sweeping the hallway near the strategy and finance offices, she overheard voices sharp and hurried. "Simone's worried about leaks," Derek was saying. "She should be," Calvin muttered. "Too many people walking around with phones these days. She's scrubbing the Slack logs. Deleted a few questionable messages already," Derek added. "Good. We can't afford another scandal. Not now, not with the board reviewing budget cuts." Denise inched closer, her body pressed against the glass wall, her chest tight with anticipation. "I told Karen to keep HR quiet," Derek said. "We'll handle any complaints internally. You just keep people like that night crew off my floor. They're starting to talk." Calvin grunted. "I'll handle it. They'll learn to shut up or quit." Footsteps. Laughter. Then silence. Denise didn't move until she was certain they were gone. Then, slowly, she reached into her cart and pressed the small button hidden behind the Windex bottle. The recording light turned green. Back at her apartment, Denise backed up the audio and video files into 3 separate encrypted drives. She labeled them Project Dawn. It was time to prepare the storm. She also wrote down a list of names: those she trusted, those who had seen too much, and those she would protect when the reckoning came. Elijah. Maribel. Raphael, the dishwasher. Even Marta, the security guard who had once slipped her a snack during a cold night. They weren't just allies. They were the reason. By Sunday evening, she had drafted a plan. Within 2 weeks, the board of Vanguard Systems would meet for its quarterly ethics and performance review. She would not wait for that. She would force an emergency session. But for it to work, she needed one more thing: someone on the inside. Someone who could vouch for her from within the very walls of power. She needed to meet her son. Again. The city skyline sparkled in the fading twilight as Denise Carter stood outside a sleek high-rise building in downtown Chicago. From this vantage point, the towering silhouette of Vanguard Systems was just a few blocks away, familiar, yet now tarnished in her memory. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was about to come. Tonight wasn't about mops or hidden cameras. Tonight, she would break the silence that had cost her too much. The apartment door clicked open. "Mom?" A voice, confused but warm, greeted her. Evan Carter stood in the hallway, barefoot, his sleeves rolled up and tie loosened from another long day as Vanguard's Director of Strategic Innovation. He was in his early 30s, sharp-minded, good-hearted, and perhaps most importantly one of the few in upper management who had stayed true to the company's original mission. He stared at his mother in disbelief. "What are you doing here? At this hour?" Denise stepped inside, removing the gray beanie that had become part of her janitor disguise. "I need to tell you something. And I need you to listen. Not as my son, but as a man who still believes in truth." Evan shut the door, concern growing in his expression. "You're scaring me." Denise walked slowly to the center of the room and took a seat on the couch, her hands trembling only slightly now. "I've been working at Vanguard for the past 6 weeks, under the name Darla. On the night crew. As a janitor." Evan blinked. "What?" "I had to see it for myself," she said, her voice steady. "The rumors. The culture. The rot spreading through that building. I didn't want to believe it until I stood in it." Evan sat across from her, stunned. "You're serious?" Denise nodded. "I've seen it all, Evan. The bullying. The racism. The power games. Simone Caldwell, Calvin Drayton, Derek Shaw, and even Karen Lim from HR. They're not just negligent. They're actively manipulating the system. They're plotting to consolidate control, hide abuse, and push out anyone who challenges them, including you. Evan leaned back, eyes wide. Why would they target me? Because you're competent. Honest. Respected. You're not like them and they know it. You threaten the foundation they're building. Denise reached into her bag and handed him a sleek black drive labeled Dawn_complete. This is everything, she said. Audio. Video. Witness statements. And internal chatter. Enough to blow the lid off everything. He took the drive, his fingers trembling. I recorded it all. And I'm going to present it to the board myself. Silence hung between them for a long moment. Then Evan spoke, his voice low. You mopped floors. Endured their abuse. 4 weeks. Just to expose them? She smiled gently. I built Vanguard with my own hands. You know that. I can't let it become a place where silence protects the wicked. If I don't fight for its soul, who will? Evan sat forward, elbows on knees. You shouldn't have done this alone. Denise reached out and squeezed his hand. I'm not alone anymore. That's why I'm here. The next morning, Evan filed an urgent internal ethics violation petition to the board, citing anonymous but irrefutable evidence of systemic abuse, misconduct, and conspiracy within the senior leadership. Attached was a request for an emergency board meeting. Within 36 hours, a private board session was scheduled for Friday at 9 a.m. Location: Vanguard's Executive Conference Hall, 47th floor. Unlisted. Confidential. No aides. No external comms. The perfect setting for a reckoning. Denise spent the next 2 days preparing her materials. She worked with Elijah and Maribel to polish the timeline of events, ensuring every piece of evidence was contextualized and traceable. She also wrote her speech. Not a grand monologue but the truth. Raw. Firm. Undeniable. On the morning of the meeting, she stood in front of her old full-length mirror. No more gray uniform. No more janitor's badge. She wore a dark navy blazer, tailored slacks, and a simple pearl pin Evan had given her for her 50th birthday. Her hair, now loose and proud, framed her face like the battle armor of a woman who had nothing left to hide. She wasn't Darla tonight. She was Denise Carter, founder of Vanguard Systems. And she was ready. The elevator glided silently to the 47th floor, its soft chime echoing through the marble-walled corridor of Vanguard Systems' executive wing. Denise Carter stepped out, her polished shoes clicking against the tiles. Her presence poised, elegant, yet electric with tension commanded immediate attention from the 2 assistants seated at the security checkpoint. Ma'am, this floor is currently. I know, Denise said, her voice calm, confident. Tell Chairman Porter that Denise Carter has arrived. The assistant blinked. Denise Carter? Yes, she replied, locking eyes with him. Founder of this company. And I'm not here as a guest. Within moments, the heavy double doors at the end of the hallway parted, revealing the expansive boardroom of Vanguard Systems. A dozen board members sat around a custom-built walnut table, their expressions tense. At the head, Chairman Malcolm Porter rose slowly, clearly caught off guard. Denise, he said, eyebrows raised. What? What is this? Denise walked in, past the rows of silent executives, and set a sleek black drive onto the conference table. You'll want to see this, she said. Seated along the right side of the table were the targets of the storm she had spent 6 weeks preparing: Simone Caldwell, Chief Operating Officer; Calvin Drayton, Head of Strategy; Derek Shaw, Director of Finance; and Karen Lim, the icy human resources head who once promised every employee fairness. Simone narrowed her eyes, trying to maintain her composure. This is highly irregular. You're no longer on the board, Denise. Denise turned slowly toward her, her voice quiet but resonant. You're right. I resigned 4 years ago. But I didn't resign my values. And I didn't hand you a license to abuse my employees. A pause swept across the room like a cold wind. Robert Kim, a younger board member from the Governance and Ethics Committee, leaned forward. Denise, I think we all need to understand what this is about. If you've come here with allegations. I've come here with truth, she interrupted gently, clicking a small remote. And you won't have to take my word for it. The large 100-inch screen on the far wall lit up. A grainy video played. In it, Derek Shaw could be seen leaning against his office window, smirking as he addressed a janitor. Look, Darla, if I spill my coffee again, you'll clean it again. That's how this works. I make the mess, and people like you scrub it out of my life. A few murmurs spread through the room. The next clip rolled automatically, Simone Caldwell berating a night shift worker, her voice cold and dismissive. You have 30 seconds to get this floor gleaming or I'll have your badge disabled. We don't pay you to think. Then Karen Lim. Janitors don't file complaints. You're not here to challenge the system. You are the system's reminder that some people are born to sweep up after others. Calvin Drayton followed last, his voice in a whisper but caught clearly in audio. Let Evan slip. If he questions anything again, we'll say he violated ethics protocol. HR will bury it. Karen already knows what to say. Gasps filled the room. Chairman Porter looked stunned. Where did this come from? Denise met his gaze. From me. I was Darla. For 6 weeks, I mopped your floors, listened to your leaders talk behind closed doors, and watched everything my company was never meant to become. I saw power used not to lead but to silence. The boardroom fell into an uneasy silence. Derek attempted a laugh, brittle and hollow. You expect us to believe this is credible? Secret recordings from a mop cart? Robert Kim interjected sharply. We don't need to believe it. The recordings speak for themselves. Karen tried to recover. This is all taken out of context. These people don't understand the pressures of leadership. Denise turned to her. No. You don't understand the weight of responsibility. I built this company in a 900-square-foot office in Bronzeville with 3 interns and a half-broken copier. And I never not once belittled someone just because I could. You've poisoned the soul of what Vanguard stands for. And I won't let it continue. Simone slammed her hand on the table. You think this little stunt is going to rewrite the truth? No, Denise said, walking slowly around the table, her eyes meeting each board member in turn. The truth has already been written. I'm just making sure it gets read. Chairman Porter stood slowly, his face pale. I've known you for 20 years, Denise. And I've never seen you this angry, she offered. No, he replied. Determined. He turned to the rest of the board. I move to immediately suspend Simone Caldwell, Calvin Drayton, Derek Shaw, and Karen Lim, pending a full ethics investigation. Denise didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply exhaled. Relief? Maybe. Resolve? Definitely. As security was called and the disgraced executive stood, Karen shot her a glare. You think you've won? No, Denise said calmly. I think Vanguard might finally start winning again. After the meeting, the boardroom emptied one by one, leaving Denise and Evan standing together at the far window. Below, Chicago hummed with late-morning life, unaware of the tectonic shift that had just occurred several floors above. I was terrified, Evan admitted. The moment she slapped that folder on the table. Denise chuckled. Good. That means you care. He smiled. What now? She looked out at the city, her voice quiet. Now we rebuild. And we never forget how fast power can corrode when left unchecked. Evan nodded. We'll do it right this time. She turned, putting a hand on his shoulder. No, she said. You will. A soft snow began to fall over Chicago that evening, blanketing the city in a hush that mirrored the stillness within Vanguard systems. But inside the 45th floor executive suite, something entirely different was happening. There was no quiet. There was movement, change, urgency. The storm had passed, but now came the rebuilding and every minute mattered. Denise Carter stood in her former office, a space that hadn't changed since the day she stepped down. The black and white photographs of Bronzeville still hung on the walls. The same leather-bound copy of The Souls of Black Folk rested on the corner of her bookshelf, untouched. It was like time had paused here. She glanced at the photo of her younger self and her son, Evan, taken the day she opened the company's second location in Atlanta. She remembered the pride in his eyes, the belief that anything was possible. That was the foundation she built Vanguard on, not just technology or finance, but belief. But belief alone wasn't enough now. The company needed structure. Reform. Rebirth. A knock came at the door. Evan stepped in, holding a slim laptop and a folder marked Vanguard 2.0, Internal Reform Plan. They're ready downstairs, he said. The department heads are all waiting. Denise nodded. Let's go. The conference hall on the 30th floor was packed. Heads of product, marketing, HR, facilities, engineering, every major team leader at Vanguard was present. Many still looked rattled, uncertain of what was coming next. A few, Denise noticed, looked hopeful. At the front, Evan clicked on a projector. The screen lit up with a bold phrase in large navy blue text. Rebuilding trust. Denise stepped to the podium. I know the past few weeks have been confusing. Shocking, even. And many of you may be wondering what comes next or whether this company is even salvageable. She paused, letting the silence settle. But I didn't come back to destroy Vanguard. I came back to save it. And now we begin. The screen changed to a list. Leadership overhaul. Zero tolerance policy for abuse. Anonymous reporting channels. Fair wage audits. Mental health and wellness initiatives. Culture Equity Council. Leadership listening sessions. These are not buzzwords, Denise continued. These are the pillars of a company that intends to treat its people like human beings again. Whispers moved through the crowd. Some skeptical. Some relieved. Starting this week, Evan said, stepping up beside her, we are launching a 90-day transitional leadership program. Every team leader will go through equity-based management training. There will be anonymous surveys, regular check-ins, and a full review of internal promotion protocols to ensure fairness and transparency. We're not just removing toxic people, Denise added. We're removing toxic systems. Vanguard cannot be a place where people are afraid to speak. Where janitors are invisible. Where power is used to intimidate. She scanned the room. Dozens of eyes met hers, some glassy with emotion, others lit with something deeper. A quiet readiness. Change is uncomfortable, she said. But so is growth. A hand shot up in the third row. It was Maya Duval, Director of Product Strategy. Ms. Carter, she began, her voice steady, how can we make sure that this doesn't just fade away like a PR stunt? That in 6 months, we're not back where we started? It was the right question. Denise nodded in appreciation. By making every single one of you accountable, she replied. This isn't a top-down fix. It's a ground-up transformation. That's why we're forming the Culture Equity Council, an independent body made up of representatives from every level of the company, including custodial, security, and cafeteria staff. No decision about culture will be made without their vote. The room stirred with quiet murmurs of surprise. And finally, Evan said, "We'll be launching a new mentorship initiative. Entry-level staff will be paired with senior leaders for monthly meetings. Not for performance evaluations but for conversations. Story sharing. Listening. We believe the fastest way to change a culture is to connect the people inside it." A long silence followed. Then applause. It wasn't loud at first. A few scattered claps. But it grew. Stronger. More certain. Not forced, not polite. Real. Denise felt something rise in her chest. Not pride exactly, something deeper. Redemption. The next morning, Denise walked into the building not as a silent janitor or as a former CEO sneaking glances from the shadows but as a woman on a mission. She passed the reception desk, where two security guards who had once ignored her now greeted her with nods of respect. "Good morning, Ms. Carter." She smiled. "Morning." On the 38th floor, she stepped into the janitor's lounge. The room fell quiet as soon as she entered. Several of the staff stood up, uncertain. But Denise raised a hand gently. "Please, sit." She looked at the men and women who had become her silent allies during those hard weeks. Some still wore expressions of disbelief. Others nodded slowly, recognizing now what they hadn't dared to imagine then. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "You reminded me why this place mattered. Why people matter." One of the custodians, Marisol, stepped forward. "You're really her?" she asked softly. Denise smiled. "I'm really her." Marisol blinked back tears. "Thank you. For seeing us." Denise's voice caught just slightly in her throat. "I see you. And I always will." That evening, as the city lights flickered on and the snow thickened outside, Denise sat in a small office next to Evan's. A fresh blueprint was spread across her desk, one labeled not with floor plans or software architecture, but with three simple words. People. Purpose. Power. She ran her fingers across the paper. This, she knew, was the new foundation. She wasn't just rebuilding a company. She was resurrecting a soul. Winter had tightened its grip on Chicago. Outside the towering windows of Vanguard Systems, Lake Michigan lay frozen in stoic silence, a glassy sea of white and blue. But within the walls of the once fractured company, something entirely different was beginning to stir. It wasn't loud. Not yet. But it was unmistakable. It was the sound of people rediscovering their voice. The first signs of change appeared in the break rooms. On a Tuesday afternoon, two software engineers and a janitor were spotted laughing over lunch at the same table, an interaction that, just a few weeks ago, would have been unthinkable. Before, the unspoken caste system had dictated that those who cleaned shouldn't mix with those who coded. But now, under Denise and Evan's leadership, the barriers were cracking. And in their place, bridges were being built. The Mentorship Across Levels initiative was already in motion. Marisol Garcia, the janitor who had first approached Denise with teary eyes, had been paired with a senior UX designer named Peter No. At first, both had been awkward. Their workdays couldn't be more different. One designed user flows, the other scrubbed baseboards. But over the course of several sessions, something clicked. "I had no idea how much thought goes into the way a product looks," Marisol said during one meeting. "And I had no idea how invisible we'd made you feel," Peter admitted quietly. That meeting ended with something rare in corporate America, an apology that meant something. In the HR department, another transformation was underway. Karen Mitchell's former office was now empty. Stripped of its self-importance. In her place stood Nia Brooks, a woman with 10 years of experience in employee advocacy, recruited from a nonprofit where she had overseen anti-harassment and inclusion training. Nia didn't believe in closed doors. Her office had a glass wall, and her calendar was public. The first order of business? Open mic sessions mandatory for every department head. Twice a month, employees at all levels could speak freely about what they were experiencing, suggest changes, or share stories anonymously. No retaliation. No hierarchy. Denise insisted on attending the first one in person. The room was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls. Coffee brewed in the back. The air was thick with anticipation and nerves. At first, no one spoke. Then a young man from IT, Deshaun Thomas, stood up and cleared his throat. "I used to walk past Gerald Hayes every day," he said, voice shaking slightly. "He never once looked at me. Not even when I held the door for him. And one time, when I wore a hoodie, he told me I looked like a gangbanger. That stuck with me." A murmur passed through the room. Deshaun looked at Denise. "I just want to thank you. For seeing what we went through. For doing something about it." Others followed. A woman from finance described being made to feel invisible in meetings. A data analyst confessed to crying in the stairwell after being belittled by Veronica Wells for a minor error. A cafeteria worker spoke of the time Derek Phillips made a racial joke in front of him and then laughed alone. Each story was a wound. But with each telling, the room didn't sink into despair, it rose in resolve. Denise stood up when the last speaker finished. "I won't stand here and pretend that we didn't fail you," she said. "We did. But failure doesn't have to be permanent. Not if we choose to listen, and grow, and keep each other accountable." Applause. Not thunderous, but real. Meanwhile, Evan Carter was spearheading an internal audit of pay equity. The numbers, when they came in, were sobering. There were gaps, significant ones, between departments, gender, race, and tenure. In one case, a black female engineer with 5 years' experience was being paid 18% less than her white male counterpart with the same role. Evan didn't flinch. He approved salary corrections within 24 hours. He made every adjustment public, too. Posted to the internal portal with detailed explanations and anonymized examples. No spin. No sugarcoating. "We got this wrong," he wrote in a company-wide email. "But we're committed to making it right." His transparency rippled throughout the company. Departments began holding their own forums. Middle managers started scheduling regular one-on-one meetings, not for performance reviews, but for honest conversations. Slowly, the culture was changing. And not from the top down. But from the middle outward and from the bottom up. Back on the 38th floor, Denise resumed her quiet routine, not as CEO, but as what people were now calling the founder-in-residence. A title that allowed her to mentor, advise, and most importantly listen. One afternoon, she walked past the same corridor where Gerald had once humiliated her. The walls had been repainted. The lighting was softer. There were now framed portraits of Vanguard's employees lining the hallway, real faces, real stories. Beneath each one, a quote. From Maria Delgado, the janitor who had been yelled at for spilling cleaner on Gerald's shoes. "I used to feel invisible here. Now I feel seen." From Daniel Kim, an engineer who nearly quit due to burnout. "The day someone asked if I was okay was the day I knew this place could change." Denise paused in front of her own portrait. It was tucked in a corner, near the janitor's supply closet. That was exactly how she wanted it. The caption read, "Sometimes, to lead, you have to return to the ground floor." She smiled. 1 year after the fall of the corrupt leadership, Vanguard Systems held its first People's Day, a celebration of its workers at every level. The event was hosted on the rooftop, complete with music, food trucks, games, and panels led by employees from across the spectrum. Denise and Evan gave a brief speech. But the highlight of the day came when Marisol stepped on stage and shared her journey from a woman afraid to speak up, to the newly appointed employee advocate liaison. "This company isn't perfect," she said, holding the mic with both hands. "But it's listening. And that's more than I ever had before." The crowd erupted. And in that moment, Denise Carter knew, they had done more than rebuild a company. They had resurrected a culture. And the voices that once were silenced? They were now leading the chorus. Spring arrived early in Chicago, but the warmth did little to calm the gathering storm. Within Vanguard systems, change had taken root. Employees walked taller, smiled more often. The halls, once cold with silence, now echoed with greetings and laughter. For the first time in years, hope had become a part of the company's DNA. But outside the glass walls of the skyscraper, forces far less hopeful were beginning to stir. It started with a single headline. Whistleblower or power player? Denise Carter's secret janitor scheme raises eyebrows in corporate America. The article came from the Argus Tribune, a national business paper known for sensational stories wrapped in facts. It detailed Denise's undercover journey, how she had disguised herself, how she'd exposed corruption, and how the executive team had been fired. But rather than applauding her courage, the tone questioned her ethics. Some argue the deception crossed ethical boundaries, the article read. If a CEO can secretly pose as a janitor, what does that say about transparency at the highest level? The story spread like wildfire. Within days, Denise became the subject of op-eds, business panel debates, and Twitter threads that either praised her or painted her as manipulative. News vans appeared outside Vanguard's headquarters. Reporters swarmed former employees, looking for sound bites. And on one Thursday morning, as Denise walked into the lobby, she was met with flashing cameras and shouted questions. "Denise, were you spying on your own company? Do you regret deceiving your employees? Is this how you define leadership?" She said nothing. Not because she didn't have answers, but because she knew it wasn't time yet. Inside Vanguard, reactions were mixed. Some employees were furious at the media, not at Denise. To them, she had saved the company, saved them. How could anyone twist that into villainy? Others, especially newer hires or those in external partnerships, were unsure. Their inboxes were filling with questions from vendors and stakeholders. Doubt, that old and unwelcome guest, was slipping back into the room. Evan Carter convened an emergency leadership meeting. "We have two options," he said, standing in front of the room. "Stay silent and wait for this to blow over, or respond publicly and reshape the narrative ourselves." "I vote we speak," said Nia Brooks. "We owe that much to our people. And to the truth." All eyes turned to Denise. She had been unusually quiet since the story broke, spending long hours reviewing internal memos, media reactions, and the legal boundaries of what she had done. Now, she slowly stood, her voice calm but firm. "I'll tell the truth," she said. "But not in a press conference. Not in a PR statement. I'll tell it to the people it matters to, first our employees." The next morning, Denise stood on the main stage of Vanguard's central atrium. The room was packed: engineers, janitors, marketers, cafeteria staff, interns, even board members. Over 900 employees gathered in person, while hundreds more joined via live stream. No podium. No teleprompter. Just her. She took a deep breath. "I know many of you have seen the headlines," she began. "Some of them say I deceived you. That I manipulated the system. That I crossed a line." A murmur passed through the crowd. "But I want to tell you why I did what I did. I want to tell you what I saw." Denise spoke for the next 20 minutes, not from notes, but from memory. She described her fears after retiring. Her shock at the reports of mistreatment. Her decision to walk back into the company disguised as someone no one would notice. She spoke about Marisol. About Gerald and Derek. About Veronica's slap. About Karen's betrayal. About the silence she had felt pressing down on the janitorial staff like concrete. "I wasn't trying to trick anyone," she said. I was trying to see what couldn't be seen from the top floor. I was trying to find the truth. Silence followed. Then a single clap. Then another. And soon, the atrium erupted with applause, not polite, not staged, but real. Marisol stepped forward from the crowd, her eyes glistening. "You gave us a voice," she said. "Now let us speak for you." What happened next surprised even Denise. Employees began posting their own testimonies on social media, using the hashtag #TruthAtVanguard. Stories poured in from maintenance workers to developers, from admin assistants to senior analysts. They described the toxic culture before, and the transformation they had seen since. "She didn't spy on us. She saw us. Thanks to Denise, I feel human again at work." If more CEOs led like this, maybe companies wouldn't be in crisis every day. The movement spread. Former employees, clients, even other executives at rival firms joined the conversation. A popular business podcast invited Denise to speak. A university ethics professor wrote an op-ed titled "Radical Transparency: The Case for Ground-Level Leadership." Public opinion began to shift. Even the Argus Tribune, under pressure from its own readership, published a follow-up piece titled "Rewriting the Rules: What Denise Carter Taught Us About Listening." Still, not everyone was on board. One particularly vocal investor, Martin Crane, a venture capitalist with a significant stake in Vanguard, called for Denise's resignation. "This stunt created unnecessary risk," he told Business Weekly. "Carter may have saved face internally, but she's made Vanguard a target for criticism." His words gained traction in boardrooms. Denise knew this was coming. And this time, she was ready. In the next board meeting, Denise didn't come alone. She brought a presentation compiled by Evan, Nia, and Peter No from UX. It wasn't about profits or damage control. It was about trust. Slide after slide showed the internal morale jump. Retention rates had improved by 14%. Customer satisfaction had increased. Employees were more productive, more innovative, more loyal. The final slide? A quote from a janitor named Luis. "Before, I thought I was just part of the background. Now I feel like I'm part of the company." Denise looked around the room. "You can replace a CEO," she said. "But can you replace the soul we just got back?" No one said a word. Not even Crane. Outside, Chicago's winds howled. But inside Vanguard, something stronger had taken root. A story once twisted into scandal had been reclaimed by truth. And the storm? It had passed. But the movement Denise began was only just beginning. 3 weeks after Denise Carter's standing ovation in the Vanguard atrium, a quiet morning settled over the Chicago skyline. The winds off Lake Michigan carried the scent of spring, and for the first time in a long time, Denise allowed herself to breathe. Not as the former CEO, not as the undercover janitor, but simply as someone who had made it through the storm. Yet, even in the stillness, her mind was busy. Because something had changed. Not just at Vanguard but outside of it. Dozens of CEOs, nonprofit leaders, and startup founders had reached out through Evan, Nia, or LinkedIn messages. They wanted to know how she did it. How she transformed a toxic workplace culture without firing half the company. How she inspired trust at a time when employees everywhere were growing cynical. That's when the idea was born, not just to move forward, but to codify the path. To create a living framework. Not a policy. A blueprint. One that other companies could use. One that didn't just rely on slogans or PR but on truth, empathy, and the power of being seen. The idea crystallized over coffee one afternoon with Evan in Vanguard's 32nd floor conference room. The same room where months earlier, Denise had been humiliated while mopping its floors. Now she sat at the head of the table, notebook in hand. Evan leaned forward. "What if we built something real, Mom? Something they can actually use, not another consultant deck with buzzwords. I'm listening, she said, smiling. We break it into phases. Not just culture change for show but operational steps. Structural. Scalable. Something that starts from the bottom, not just the boardroom. Denise scribbled words across the page: see. Listen. Empower. Protect. Transform. She looked up. We're not writing a rulebook. We're writing a revolution. Within days, the team formed a small working group. Evan brought in Marisol from facilities, Nia from HR, Peter from UX, and even Louise, whose quiet voice had resonated powerfully in the boardroom. The group met every afternoon for 2 weeks, whiteboarding ideas, debating priorities, and designing something practical yet visionary. They called it Project Truth Frame. It began with 5 pillars. Ground visibility. Every executive must spend 4 hours a month working alongside employees 2 levels below them. Anonymous vertical feedback loops, a real-time reporting system where insights and concerns bypass middle management and go straight to an ethics ombudsman. Respect audits, annual evaluations that measure how teams treat support staff, not just performance metrics. Ethical leadership certification, mandatory training for all leadership, with a focus on emotional intelligence, unconscious bias, and situational empathy. Protected voice clause, a policy that guarantees zero retaliation for employees raising concerns even anonymously with a third-party oversight firm involved. But Truth Frame wasn't just about internal reform. It included a transparency dashboard, made public every quarter, where Vanguard shared culture indicators alongside financial performance. Employee morale. Turnover by department. Promotion diversity ratios. We have to stop pretending numbers and humanity are separate, Denise said in one meeting. A company's soul lives in both. The response was immediate. Once the initiative was quietly soft-launched on Vanguard's website, calls and emails flooded in from leaders across the country. Some were skeptical. Others, inspired. But then a message came from an unexpected source. Harbor Cross Solutions, a Fortune 100 logistics firm with over 50,000 employees, requested a private consultation. Their CEO, Linda Chow, had read everything, seen the backlash Denise weathered, followed how she'd risen through it. I need help, Linda admitted on a private Zoom call. I've got divisions that haven't seen a VP in 3 years. I've got an anonymous forum where employees write like they're in a therapy session. And I've got no clue where to begin. Denise nodded. You begin by showing up. Quietly. Authentically. And most of all, with no defense in your voice when you hear the hard truths. Linda exhaled. Will you come speak to my executive team? Denise agreed. The following week, Denise stood in a massive boardroom in Atlanta, 1,300 miles from Chicago. The room was filled with powerful people in tailored suits, many of whom were quietly suspicious, others simply curious. She told them the story. Not just about the mop or the slap. But about the silence. The heads lowered. The tired smiles. The absence of trust that had grown like rust beneath glossy surfaces. She told them what it felt like to be invisible in a company you had built with your own 2 hands. Then she handed them each a printout of Project Truth Frame. Don't just read it, she said. Walk through it. Live it. An executive raised his hand. What's the ROI of this? Denise smiled. Let me ask you this: what's the cost of losing your soul? Back in Chicago, Vanguard became a case study. Business schools started teaching the Carter turnaround. Employee testimonials went viral. A documentary team from PBS called about a special feature on workplace ethics. And all the while, Denise remained grounded. She still took time to sit with janitors in the break room. She still visited the HR floor to talk policy with Nia. And she still walked the 45th floor with Evan, each time pausing at the window they once stood before on the day the company began to rise again. "You think TruthFrame is working?" Evan asked one night as they stood there. Denise didn't answer right away. She just watched a new group of interns in the lobby laughing, excited, wide-eyed. Then she turned to her son. "If just one person walks into this company and feels like they matter, then yes. It's working." 2 months after the launch of TruthFrame, Vanguard Systems no longer felt like the company Denise Carter once feared had lost its soul. The atmosphere had changed. You could see it in small moments: an executive holding open a door for the night shift crew, a product designer inviting a customer service rep to a strategy session, and the way people now looked each other in the eyes instead of past them. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was real. And it was spreading. By mid-May, Denise received messages from over a dozen organizations, from nonprofit clinics in Detroit to an aerospace startup in Texas, all asking for guidance, mentorship, or permission to adapt parts of TruthFrame for their own use. One of the most surprising requests came in the form of a letter handwritten, postmarked from Washington, D.C. It was from Angela Thornton, the U.S. Secretary of Labor. The letter was short, direct, and strikingly personal. "Ms. Carter. Your story moved me. But more than that, your solution inspired me. We are exploring new national standards for workplace culture, accountability, and ethical leadership. Your TruthFrame model is the most human-centered framework we've seen. I would be honored to speak with you about the possibility of creating a federal advisory panel, one that you would lead." Denise reread the letter twice. She had expected calls from companies. Maybe business schools. Even investors wanting to rebrand. But a direct invitation from the Department of Labor? She smiled to herself. The janitor uniform was long gone, but the lessons she learned in it had never been more alive. That Friday, Denise flew to Washington, D.C., for a private meeting at the Francis Perkins Building. She wore her signature navy blue pantsuit and carried a worn leather folio filled with notes, testimonials from Vanguard staff, and anonymized case studies from companies already piloting TruthFrame. Angela Thornton met her in the paneled conference room just off the 7th floor. She was in her early 50s, poised, with silver-streaked curls and a quiet fire in her eyes. "I don't believe in quick-fix culture," Angela said after their initial greetings. "But what you've created isn't a band-aid. It's a philosophy. A blueprint for change grounded in action." Denise nodded. "That was the goal. I didn't want another program to boost morale. I wanted to expose power abuse and build equity from the ground up." Angela leaned forward. "Would you help us create a national version? Voluntary, of course, but with incentives for businesses that adopt it, like federal recognition, grants for ethical leadership training, and inclusion in a new annual registry of people-first employers?" Denise paused, taking in the weight of the moment. "You want to take this nationwide?" "No," Angela said with a soft smile. "I want you to help us redefine what leadership means in this country." Back in Chicago, the news spread like wildfire. Within weeks, Denise was appointed as the Senior Advisor for Ethical Workplace Reform, a new role created by the Department of Labor. It was mostly voluntary, but it came with the power to influence national policy, shape training programs, and develop a standardized TruthFrame index that organizations could voluntarily opt into and be publicly rated on. It was controversial. Some business leaders saw it as too idealistic. Others feared it would lead to whistleblower overload or HR backlash. But more than anyone expected, people listened. Because Denise didn't speak like a politician. She didn't sell perfection. She spoke like someone who had been there, who had wiped floors, endured humiliation, and then used truth to rebuild something better. Back at Vanguard, Evan led internal transformation full-time as Chief Culture Officer, a role inspired by his mother's journey. Under his leadership, Vanguard created a transparency hall in the main lobby. It displayed monthly metrics, employee satisfaction scores, ethical audit grades, and anonymous quotes from feedback submissions. People stopped to read them every day. Meanwhile, Nia expanded the HR department into a full-fledged people empowerment division, including on-site counselors, ombudspersons, and a new peer voice network made up of volunteers from every floor and department. Luis, the once quiet voice from facilities, now hosted monthly fireside chats with executives and junior staff, casual forums where every rank in the company could speak openly. He titled the series, "From the Ground Up." By summer, over 300 companies nationwide had signed up to pilot the Truth Frame model. Some implemented one pillar. Others embraced the full 5. The impact was slow but meaningful. A small trucking company in Idaho posted on LinkedIn, "We may not be Vanguard. We don't have skyscrapers. But since we started See, Listen, Empower, our drivers say they've never felt more respected. And that's enough for us." An executive assistant in Boston commented, "I cried the day my CEO shadowed my work and said, 'I never knew how much you carry.' Thank you, Truth Frame." Denise kept a folder, digital and printed, called Voices. It held all the stories people sent her. She read them on hard days. And there were still many. Because change was never linear. Some companies signed up and never followed through. Others faced backlash when middle managers resisted losing control. But Denise reminded them all. The goal isn't perfection. It's presence. The courage to see what's real and still show up with integrity. On the first anniversary of her reveal at Vanguard, the company hosted a quiet internal ceremony. No press. No sponsors. Just employees, a few chairs, and a mural unveiled in the lobby. It was titled Legacy of Light. The mural depicted a janitor's silhouette at the base, gradually transforming into a woman standing at a podium, light bursting from behind her. Around the edges were dozens of painted hands symbolizing every department that now held power together. Evan stood beside his mother as the cloth fell from the artwork. His voice cracked as he spoke. Vanguard was built by one woman's vision. But it was saved by her courage to listen when no one else would. This mural isn't about our brand. It's about our soul. And that soul was never about profits. It was about people. Denise didn't say much that day. Just 6 quiet words. I see you. I hear you. Always. It was late November when the letter arrived. Handwritten, no return address. The envelope was creased, the ink slightly smudged as if the sender had hesitated long before mailing it. Denise Carter opened it slowly, curious. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting. Just a name and a sentence that made her breath catch in her throat. You don't remember me. But I remember you. Marcus Ellison, former Director of Strategic Development, Vanguard Systems. The name hit her like a sudden gust of wind in a closed room. Marcus. The man who once stood above her in the boardroom. The same one who, 2 years ago, had stared at her mopping the floor in a janitor's uniform and laughed not out of humor, but entitlement. His voice had been one of the first to reinforce the cruelty she witnessed. She hadn't seen or heard from him since that day. After the scandal broke, he vanished, resigned just before the board could terminate him. No media statements. No interviews. Just silence. Until now. On the back of the letter was a phone number. A brief note. If you still believe in redemption, I'd like to talk. Denise folded the paper and stared out her office window. The Chicago skyline was gray, the wind heavy with winter's arrival. She let the letter sit on her desk for days. She wasn't afraid of Marcus. But she wasn't sure she was ready to reopen that wound, either. On the 4th day, she called. They met in a small cafe in Evanston, far from the bustle of the city. It was nearly empty. Marcus sat near the window, hunched slightly in a wool coat, eyes hollow from something more than just time. He stood when he saw her, then paused, unsure if she'd accept a handshake. Denise extended her hand. "Marcus," she said softly. "Denise," he replied. "Or should I say, Ms. Carter. CEO. Legend. Architect of justice?" She smiled faintly. "Let's just stick with Denise." They sat. There was a long silence. The kind of silence that comes only when two people share a past neither one wants to relive but knows they must. "I'm not here to ask for anything," Marcus said. I needed to say some things out loud. Before I disappear again." Denise listened. "I watched what you did," he continued. "I read every headline. Saw your speeches. Truth frame. The advisory role. Anne. I deserved every bit of shame I felt." He paused. "I was one of them. The ones who stood by and let it happen. Sometimes, I was the one making it happen." Denise leaned in, her voice steady. "Why now, Marcus?" He looked out the window, eyes glassy. "Because I almost died." He tapped his chest gently. "Cardiac arrest. 2 months ago. Out of nowhere. I flatlined for 47 seconds. Silence. When I came to, the first thing I remembered wasn't my house or my bank account or the companies I'd built. It was your face. You, in that uniform, looking up at me after I stepped in your bucket on purpose." He swallowed. "You didn't say a word. But you didn't flinch either. That dignity. That calm. It haunted me." Denise felt a quiet ache in her chest, not from pity, but from the strange recognition of what remorse could look like when stripped bare. "I wasn't just cruel, Denise," Marcus said, voice cracking. "I was empty. I thought power was presence. That silence meant I'd won. But now I see silence just meant I missed everything that mattered." They sat in stillness for a moment, letting the weight of truth settle between them. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said finally. "But if there's something I can do somewhere I can be useful, point me there." Denise studied him. She thought about the janitors who never got a second chance. About people like Maria and Luis. About every hand that had trembled under the weight of silence. Then she said the most unexpected thing.
"Come to Vanguard." Marcus blinked. "What?" "Not as a leader," she clarified. "As a learner. As a volunteer in our peer voice network. No pay. No perks. Just stories. Listening. Lifting." His jaw tightened. "You'd allow that? After everything?" "I wouldn't if it were just about you," she replied. "But it's about them. The people who need to see that even those who once hurt them, can change." He didn't respond for a long time. But then, finally, he nodded. "I'll be there Monday." 3 months later, Marcus stood quietly beside Luis during a peer voice roundtable. He didn't speak much. But when he did, it was only to ask one question: what would you want someone like me to hear? No fanfare. No public redemption arcs. Just work. Just presence. And slowly, people began to nod when he entered a room instead of looking away. 1 year after TruthFrame was launched, Vanguard held a celebration not of numbers, but of names. They called it the Day of Light. Not a party. A remembrance. Of stories told. Of silence broken. Of futures rewritten. Denise stood at the center, surrounded by employees old and new. She looked at her son, Evan. At Maria, now a team lead. At Karen Mitchell's replacement, who had implemented sweeping reforms in HR with empathy and transparency. And then she looked up. At the mural in the lobby, now updated. A second figure had been added beside the woman rising from the janitor's silhouette. This one showed a person hunched in shame, but reaching hand outstretched toward the light. Underneath, 3 words glowed in brass letters. Justice. Mercy. Change. Denise closed her eyes, heart full. The company was not perfect. It never would be. But it was alive. And for the first time in a